Hello and welcome back to another episode of Teaching My Dad Football. First of all, want to apologise for the slight hiatus. We've been gone for a while. Unfortunately, a lot of things. Well, I got very busy with the university.
I did a bit of travel, and I wasn't
you were
here.
away a bit. You've started a new job now, so yeah. But happy to be back. Happy to be talking about football once again. Because I think the last time we recorded one of these was a couple of months ago. So
Yeah, and it'd be good to talk today, in particular because Arsenal had a really good game, and so it's good to come back with being happy about the good result.
yeah. Just before we get into today's episode, I think we should reintroduce ourselves a little bit. I'm Joe.
I'm Emmy.
This is my dad. For those of you watching on YouTube right now, you can see us. For those of you listening on any audio sources, feel more than welcome to come to the YouTube channel, which you can search for on YouTube under Teaching My Dad Football. And you'll find us, I'm pretty sure.
And I'm obviously the dad, and you are the son, and you're the one who knows about football, and I'm the one who...
Hence the name of this podcast, Teaching My Dad Football, because he's the clueless one. So, yeah. But generally what we'll do on these podcasts is we're going to go through all the Premier League results at the weekend. Since it's also been so long, I think we'll also discuss where these teams lie and where their seasons are right now. It's sort of like just gone past the mid-season. So we'll do a little bit of a mid-season review as well, I think, for some of these teams as we touch on their results.
So who do you want to start with?
Well, I think there's only one game to start with. If you've not joined us before, we are both massive Arsenal fans. We're both, we have season tickets at the for the stadium. So I think, it's the biggest game of the weekend as well. And sometimes we talk about Arsenal at the start. Usually we do because we're Arsenal fans. But I think also given that it's the biggest game, we're better not to start than Arsenal 3, Liverpool 1.
That was a rather amazing result, unexpected in some ways, for me at least.
I know you weren't particularly confident going into the game. I was quite confident because given how we played them, and I mean, I went to the FA Cup game, you didn't, but given how we played them in the FA Cup, I didn't have that much concern. My only concern is we'll go there today and we won't finish our chances, and it will go to 70, 80 minutes, 0-0, and they'll get one chance and they'll score their win or something. Like, I could see that happening because that's what happened in the FA Cup game, essentially. Although they didn't even really actually score their first goal. It was an own goal. But nonetheless, we didn't take our chances that game and we got punished for it in the end. It's a side like Liverpool usually do punish you if they get a chance or two.
And instead, this time...
Well, this time we took our chances, although Havertz should have scored his chance on the first goal, but nonetheless, Saka got the rebound and it went in. We could have scored more than one in the first half, and in the end, it came back to bite us at the end of the first half, which we'll get into as well. But nonetheless, I was relatively confident going into the game. I thought if we play them like how we did in the FA Cup, lightning doesn't tend to strike twice, and I thought it'd be quite unlikely, especially because in this game I was expecting Saka to play, Martinelli to play. We'd have a stronger starting 11, and also given the injuries that they had, and obviously Salah being out and Endo being out because of international tournaments, although both of them are technically back now, but Salah wasn't fit to play, and they had a bunch of other not fit players. I was relatively confident looking at the starting lineups. I thought, as much as we were missing Gabriel Jesus, I thought Kai Havertz likes these big games. He may not always score, but he'll put himself about, which is exactly what he did. And I think we'll discuss the first goal now because he played a big part in it. Now, I've watched a decent amount of tactical analyses on these. I don't know if you have. Just sort of breaking down the goal, and a lot of Liverpool fans I saw online after the game were complaining about like how basically all 3 goals were preventable, and to an extent they were, but I think the first goal is a bit. A lot of people said, "Oh, it's a Liverpool mistake." The first goal, in some sense, yes, it's a mistake, but it's also Arsenal were baiting Liverpool to press them, and especially because you had Jorginho starting in midfield this game. His ability. Just come forward a bit. I'll focus on the video. Stay where you are. But essentially, because Jorginho was in that midfield this game, Zinchenko didn't invert in this game, and he actually stayed quite wide at times. But because of then Havertz dropping really deep when he was starting at centre forward on paper, although in actuality the build-up was a little bit different. It was more so Havertz sort of played as a false 9 alongside Odegaard. Odegaard was maybe a little bit deeper at times, but I think I was explaining this before, where usually we play like that box midfield in this game. Essentially, because of instead of Zinchenko inverting, because we just had Declan Rice and Jorginho as the pivot players, it meant that we have to form the box from elsewhere. And essentially, what Arteta decided to do was, I'll play Odegaard and Havertz when we're building up from the back in false 9s, or almost both in number 10 positions. And it threw Liverpool really off because Havertz dropped really deep at times, and so did Odegaard. And it's like, we've got extra men in the build-up. And so when Havertz dropped deep, Liverpool's press was all over the place, and they didn't know what to do. And the ball ends up going out to Zinchenko on the left-hand side. And then Havertz gets back upfield to get into sort of more striker position. And as that's happening, Odegaard came into the midfield to receive the ball from Zinchenko, and at that point, Van Dijk had a decision to make. Do I go with Odegaard, or do I stay or do I stay in defence? And the reality is what he should have done was just stayed where he was, because McAllister was tracking Havertz, but only to a certain point. At some point, he's handed off to Konate to deal with, and it was at that point that then Odegaard got the ball. Van Dijk made a movement towards Odegaard, but the issue is that because of Van Dijk going towards Odegaard, there's a whole lot of space in behind for Havertz, who's making that run now, and it completely opens up for him, and that's how he gets through on goal. Should have scored, but it was a really good move from Arsenal nonetheless.
Yeah, and thankfully Saka was in the
right
place at the right time, and was able to pick up the ball and score.
Yeah. Went mental in the stadium.
Yeah.
As you would expect in a big game like that, where everything is riding on the game. And the rest of the first half, we press wise, they couldn't handle. They were finding it really difficult. I think they were really missing Darwin Núñez up top in that first half, because they're essentially just trying to play through us, and every time the ball went long, they were losing the ball, and they had no one to target up top. So I think he was the biggest miss for them, actually, in that game, because I know people will say, well, what about Salah? Yeah, of course Salah was a massive miss, because look, he's arguably the best player in the league. But in that sort of game, Salah could have made a difference, but I actually think Núñez would have been more involved than Salah would have been. Salah may very well have gotten one chance and he would have scored it, right? But Núñez would have provided an outlet for them over the top, because we were pressing so high, and our centre-backs were that when our press started, all our centre-backs were jumping up as well, and their strikers and their forwards were just like, well, there's all this space in behind, but then the ball's not going long to us, and it's essentially because they just can't get the ball long to them, because our players in front, the ball goes over the top, and our players can head it away because they're better in the air than their front line was, and so they essentially had no options in that first half. Now.
And then all of a sudden, a couple of minutes to the end.
Yeah, and then all of a sudden, I've watched it back a number of times, and it's a mix up. Saliba needs to be stronger. It's Luis Diaz. Saliba's, for whatever reason, for a man who's 6'3", he seems to get sort of outworked and outbodied by guys that maybe you wouldn't always expect him to do. And I think it's not even the fact that he's strong, Saliba. You've seen him body Haaland. Like, he's strong. I think being so young as he is, he's not as dominant in duels as he possibly should be. I don't think he has quite learned how to use his body correctly. And I think you saw it, because he should be able to usher that ball back to Raya without Luis Diaz being able to stick a leg in and hit the ball across the box, which in turn hit his hand and went in the back of the net. Raya should have come for it. He should have seen that Saliba was ushering for it, and his first thing was the ball is now approaching my 6-yard box. This is my area to deal with this. Raya should have been out quicker. He didn't. If Saliba had noticed that Raya wasn't coming, he should have then cleared it himself. And then Gabriel was just unfortunate, wrong place, wrong time, and the ball hits him and goes in the back of the net. And Liverpool, they did nothing in the first half. They didn't have a shot on target, find themselves at halftime 1-1, and you're just thinking, all that hard work, all those chances undone for nothing, and you're just thinking, oh, it's going to head that way, isn't it?
And instead
it didn't. But given that, at the start of the second half, I thought Liverpool came out relatively well. Essentially, you can't sustain the press that we were doing on them in that first half, so we dropped back a little bit, and I thought for about 10 minutes they were starting to get a foothold in the game. Until they decided, you know what, you made a mistake in the first half, we'll give you one right back.
It was a major surprise, but that's what happened.
Down our end in the stadium, the ball's going over the top, and I'm just seeing Van Dijk, trying to usher it back to Alisson. Not quite the same, but similar-ish, I guess, to the first half where the ball's trying to be ushered back. And then the next thing I know, Alisson's come rushing out for it. He hasn't actually missed the ball. I don't know if you might not have seen it on the replay, but actually as he goes to sort of kick the ball, because Martinelli had sort of nudged Van Dijk a little bit, he'd nudged him to the point where he then makes just the slightest contact on Alisson's foot as he's going to kick the ball to clear it. But because of that contact, Alisson doesn't make contact with the ball, and the ball just drops at Martinelli's feet, and he's just thinking, well, this is the easiest goal I ever score. One of the easiest, I'm sure, to an open net. 2-1, and I can't quite believe my eyes of just what's happened, because over the past 5 years, arguably the two best in their position have just had one of the biggest mess-ups in what was the biggest game of the season for them as well.
And thankfully that happened. And then after that, Arsenal kept playing with desire to win, which I thought was...
Yeah, after that point, I think the thing that we should say here is that the game possibly could have gone in a different direction after the second half. I thought Liverpool, they're the sort of team where they don't need many chances to score, and if you give a half chance to someone like Jota, he can take it, and the next thing you know, you're 2-1 down and you're trying to break them down. But because we end up going 2-1 up at that point, they had no idea how to break us down in the first half. They had no idea how to break us down in the second half, and they had one shot on target for the entire game, and I think their only shot on target was a shot from outside the box, which is now the second time this season that we've limited a team. Well, we limited City to one shot on target, and now we've limited Liverpool to one shot on target.
Yeah, and what do you think about then Trossard goal?
Well, before we get onto that, there was the Konate sending off. Again, I've seen a lot of Liverpool fans complaining online about maybe it shouldn't have been a yellow card. I can understand why they were maybe a little bit frustrated, because I thought Gabriel got lucky to not see a second yellow himself. Because there was one sort of on the halfway line with Nunez, and I remember in the stadium when it happened, I was just like, oh, please don't. And the referee let it go, and I was thinking, well, we got away one. We possibly have got away with one there. I haven't actually seen any replays of it online, to be fair. But Konate's one, he puts his arm, like, Havertz has now got past him. Kanate, I think if Kanate stands still, he probably doesn't get a yellow card, but he put his arm across Havertz, and it's at that point, it's like Havertz then goes down, and you've got no real option if you're the referee but to give us a yellow card in that scenario. Maybe if it had been the first 5 minutes of the game, he might have let it go, but at that point in the game, it's like, well, that's just a yellow card, and there's no escaping it, unfortunately, for if you are Kanate there, and he got sent off. I know Klopp didn't look particularly happy. He gave a thumbs up on the sideline to the referee, which was a bit sarcastic, but and at that point, I think the game was Liverpool didn't look like scoring all day. Definitely weren't going to score at that point, and then Trossard, who'd come on for Martinelli. I don't know, some people were saying, well, why is Martinelli coming off, blah, blah, blah. But I think Martinelli had done so much sprinting and running that game, he worn his socks out. So I actually didn't mind the Trossard substitution. And in the end, he turns Harvey Elliott, then runs the quickest I've ever seen Leandro Trossard run. And then with a slight deflection of Van Dijk's foot, it ends up in between Alisson's leg and into the back of the net.
Yeah, I must admit, it was a brilliant goal. Just
Yeah. The skill to get past Harvey Elliott was really good.
He had, fiercely, was contending with not one, not two, but at least 4 Liverpool players. They're all, they
were chasing after him. And then, I will say this about Van Dijk. Van Dijk is arguably the best centre-back in the world and has been over the past sort of 5-6 years. However, things that you see him do as a defender, and it happened on the first, and it's the same reason why the first goal was conceded, is he's a percentage defender. And what I mean by that, as a percentage defender, is that he will defend what is the more likely chance that someone scores. Now, he knows, and for that Trossard goal, because he's sort of running alongside Trossard at one point, but he's not really sprinting at him. And you might be thinking, well, why is he not doing that? And it's because he knows that Arsenal like cutting the ball back. And if Trossard cut the ball back, and if there was a runner behind him, that ball can end up in the back of the net really easily. But the issue is that he had a look, and he sees that he has 2 defenders next to him. At that point, his decision making should have been, look, as much as I want to stop the cutback, I should stop the shot as well. If I go to block the shot and he cuts it back, I've got 2 defenders there. It's their job to cover me. And at that point, and unfortunately for him, he plays the percentage, but Trossard decides, well, I'm going to go alone here. And by the time Van Dijk realises, oh wait, I need to stick a leg out, it actually caused the ball to go in the back of the net because it takes that slight deflection off his foot. It's one of those things that you notice about him as a defender, is he doesn't always fully commit himself. And it can cost you in those games sometimes. And I think in this game it cost, because on the first goal he needs to just stay. He just needs to stick his position. Odegaard would have had all the space in the world in the middle of the pitch, but he was basically on the halfway line. Like, you're 50 yards away from goal, like, rather than getting pulled out of position, which gave all the space in behind for Havertz. If he just stuck to his position, it's not an issue there. On the third goal for Arsenal, if he tries to block Trossard, there was actually no one there for the cutback, so it wouldn't have been a goal either. But at that point, the game was probably done. Like, I don't think that Liverpool would have scored, but it was the dagger, it was the sealer for Arsenal.
Anyway, and so reality, then the game ended, 3-1. Was a very good result. I know that there was
much needed for us, because had we drawn this game, we would have gone 5 points behind Liverpool and the potential for 5 points behind City as well, which I assume they'll win their game in hand. And at that point, it would have been a real long shot for us to win the league. Had we lost, the league would have been done. There would have been no title race for us, and we would have been possibly even at that point, because I think for those players not seeing us in a title race, we might have then had some bad results and then got dragged into a Champions League race even. But winning that game keeps us in the title race, albeit we are 2 points behind Liverpool and probably 3 points behind City. But we've got to be in there, and we've got to continue doing what we're doing now. We've got to hit a run now, because all teams that win the league in recent years have hit that 10-game win streak or whatever it is, minimum 10-game win streak, double-digit win streak, and just accumulate a lot of points for the rest of the season, because we had that Christmas period where we didn't do particularly well. We lost to Villa, we lost to West Ham, we lost to Fulham. You've got to put that past you now, and you've just got to go for it. And if City win all that, and if City win all the rest of their games, they'll win the league. But as long as we can keep pace with them, that's the best that we can do.
Yeah,
from this point onwards.
I think the positive was, I think it sort of came out of that you now, really hope, if they can play with the same resolve, then hope and do the same, and hopefully avoid again little mistakes. There was only one this game. Then obviously there's quite a bit of hope. And I think going back, and then we'll stop talking about this game. Celebrations at the end of the game, I think, were justified because what you say, what the game meant.
The relief, it's the relief on the pressure. These games nowadays are especially so much more under the spotlight. The Premier League's the biggest league in the world, and so those players are feeling the pressure. So when it comes to when it comes to the final whistle, you've won the game, you've kept yourself in the title race. Our season was on the line essentially. If we lose that game. If we lose that game, we're out of it. That's our Premier League season done. If we draw it, it's really unlikely. But because of winning that game, it gives us a real shot now.
And winning it the way that they did. So I think
and the manner in which it was done. Had the mistake not happened with the goal, had Arsenal even been a little bit more clinical themselves, you could have, on another day, you could be walking out of there. Kivior could have scored his header in the second half. Saka could have scored that header in the first half, and then all of a sudden, then that's two relatively big chances in the game, and that could have been what. And if the mistake doesn't happen at the other end, that could have been a 5-0. Like, that's how dominant it was from Arsenal. In fact, when you look at the XG, Liverpool generated something like 0.4, and Arsenal, depending on what XG database you go by, produced about 3.5, 3.6, 3.7, anywhere sort of in that metrics, which is the most that Liverpool have conceded on expected goals under Jurgen Klopp's tenure as manager.
Right,
which I think just shows you just how good Arsenal were.
And so maybe the last bit, saying the kind of things that we were going to comment on. What do you think Liverpool and Arsenal stand now for the end of the season?
Well, we'll both be chasing City now. City love being chased. They relish it. But both of us have games against them, and those are the things that swing it in the end. We've beaten City once already this season in the one game we've had them in the league. We've got a point at Anfield, and we've beaten Liverpool at home. And that's what can swing a league title in the end. If we go to the Etihad and get a draw, let's say, and when they play at Anfield, if they draw against Liverpool, all of a sudden that gap really tightens. And there's a real chance there that we could then find ourselves possibly top of the league. And if we win our games, blah, blah, blah. There's a long way to go still. There's 15 games that we've still got to play. And we've still got to win all our other games. I don't think we have room to drop points, really. Well, I don't think we have room to... If we lose the game, I think we're done. We've already lost 4 games this season. So if we lose another one, we're done. But
at the moment, it's looking... bright.
We're in a healthy position. Could it be healthier? Yeah. I mean, had that blip over Christmas not happened, there's 3 losses in there, which I don't think should happen. That probably should be 3 wins, and you'd be talking about us instead of being on... how many points are we on? If I have a quick look.
What is it, 46?
Currently in the league table, we're on 49 points. Yeah. Do I wish that those 3 losses had been 3 wins? Yeah, and we would have been on 58 points. 7 clear of Liverpool, and even with City, if they were to win their game in hand, 6 clear of them. Like, that'd be the perfect world, but we don't live in a perfect world. We have to deal with what we've given, and we just have to go out there and win the rest of our games. And when it comes to that game at the Etihad, that will define our season. if as long as we keep pace, that will be the defining moment of our season. If we lose to them, we'll go too far behind City. But then there's the game between Liverpool and City at Anfield, which could give, if that's a draw in that game, could give us a boost in those terms. But
and I think the next
one game at a time.
I think the next 5 games, City has I would say a harder schedule compared to Arsenal.
Don't know what their fixtures are actually.
I seem to remember that.
I mean, we'll get on. I think we'll talk about them next because we both watched that game. But here, if I check City's next games, City's fixtures, no. They've got four of their next 5 games are all at home, and their only away game is at Bournemouth, which they should win.
But they're still playing it against teams that are able or performing.
I mean, Everton are a good defensive side, so you never know, they could go there and hold them to a draw. But City rarely drop points at home. Chelsea are not good enough. They've just beaten Brentford, so I don't see that going much differently, although Brentford did give them a good game. Bournemouth away. Bournemouth have been good this season, but I don't think they'll struggle against Bournemouth, and then they've got United at home, and I don't think... I mean, United could do something, but it's not in their next 5 games, but that 6th game, in 6 game times, they've got Liverpool at Anfield, so...
Yeah, they'll be...
That could, it could open things up for us, possibly, but we'll have to wait and see.
And so, what we're saying at the moment is that obviously, as you said, City is not just simply breathing down the neck of Liverpool and Arsenal, but it's
they're going above us.
They're in a position to go above us and keep the distance until the moment that they play potentially the Man U or they play against us.
You mean Liverpool?
Against Liverpool.
Yeah. Speaking of City, yesterday, we're recording this on Tuesday. Monday night football under the lights at G-Tech Stadium in West London, and Brentford get off to a very good start with a very, very well worked goal kick goal where you can't be offside for it. So Tony, even though he comes offside to sort of he pinned Ake, he doesn't touch the ball, and Mope finds himself running through one-on-one and goal and scores, and it's brilliantly worked by Brentford, who this season are actually only 3 points above the relegation drop, but I think they're a lot better than what their position on the table shows, and I think they'll be okay, but you never know how those things can go. But they get off 1-0. Brentford look really good defensively. Their goalkeeper is making save after save, and you're thinking they're going to go in at half-time 1-0 up. And then Ethan Pinnock, ball goes into the box. Ethan Pinnock I think he thinks that Haaland's behind him, tries to clear it, and Foden picks up the scraps and puts it into the back of the net, and it's 1-1 right on half-time. And from Brentford's side, it's just that I can imagine going into that half-time, into that dressing room, and just Thomas Frank probably would have been furious, because it would have been like, you've done all that hard work to go 1-0 up and to stay 1-0 up, and now you've just thrown it away. Yeah.
But after that, I think, as usually happens, City just
they start
shown that
they show their quality.
Because they had, as you said, Brentford really defended really well, but there are plenty of opportunities for City. The keeper not get them out of of scoring, and so in some ways,
City deserved to win. In the end.
They were. They really were the better side, and so for Brentford, as you said, yes, they are better than the position on the table seems to suggest, and so that they should be okay. this season as well. And City, again,
they're on that run now.
They're on the run, and the time that they play with Liverpool, may indicate what happens.
Yeah,
to
I
the
mean,
season.
if they go to Anfield and beat Liverpool, they won't be stopped. Not even us will stop them, because if you can go to Anfield and win, that's the hallmark of a team that can win a Premier League title, unfortunately. And well, no Big Six side has done it since 2015, I believe. So yeah, Liverpool under Klopp at home in the league are very, very difficult to beat. And if Van Dijk is playing well, they've only ever lost one game at home with Van Dijk playing. So, and that was last season when they had quite an off season. So,
shall we then focus on?
Well, I think we should talk about one player in that game in particular, in that City Brentford game, and that's Phil Foden, who scored a hat trick, was everywhere. Personally, I think he's probably been City's best player this season. Although there's been times in which he's maybe gone missing at times in certain games, but I think on the most part he's been really good for them this year, and playing centrally, which is where he should be playing, and not out on the wing, is where where you can do the most damage. And actually, interestingly enough, you're kind of almost seeing De Bruyne shift almost wide at times, a lot wider at times, almost to accommodate Phil Foden. De Bruyne, who is brilliant at delivering balls into the box from that right-hand side, essentially where Foden might have been asked to keep his width a bit more at times, he's allowed to sort of interchange with De Bruyne a lot more. And I think that works really well for City. And you're just seeing Pep start to tweak things, figure things out. And, I think in their last sort of 7 or 8 games, they've won them all. I think they've won 6 in a row in the league now, after that blip that they had where I think it was like 5 games or so that they really struggled in.
Yeah, the start. Yeah.
Sort of near Christmas time as well, and they went away to Saudi Arabia, and since they've come back, they've dealt with every single game that's come their way. So,
do you think there's a chance they may have another blip?
No. The thing that will decide now will be those games that Liverpool and Arsenal have against City. There's a chance that maybe someone goes in there and draws against them, but I can't see them losing another game this season unless it's against Arsenal or Liverpool. I don't think there's any other team that will go in there and beat them this season. The only team that could beat them would be Spurs at home, because as much as they beat them in the FA Cup the other day and they dominated Spurs in that game, for whatever reason, going to Spurs away from home for City, they just really struggle. In fact, it was their first goal at that stadium in the FA Cup game after however many games. So you never know. Spurs have a couple players coming back by the time I think that game gets played. I don't know when it is. I think maybe March time. But Spurs could beat them, but apart from that, I don't see City dropping many points otherwise. So those games where you're playing each other are essentially what decides league titles at the end of it. And we're in a pretty strong position where we've already taken 4 points from Liverpool, and there's still one more game to play against City, albeit it is at the Etihad, where they rarely ever lose, let alone drop points.
Right. Shall we move on then to chat about the other teams there are?
Well, I think we should talk about one London team that is going through absolute hell right now, and that is Chelsea, which puts a real smile on my face because they deserve it. No, I do feel for Chelsea fans out there, because what the owners and the management of that club are doing, they will run them into the ground, and they've put themselves in such a hole financially. I don't know how much more money they can spend in the future windows, because they've laid out so much money over the sort of the next 5-6 years, and the issue is that they don't have many players that they can sell either. So unless they're willing to settle the only players sort of this season that have shown signs of being good for them, so, or players that maybe have been out injured, but at that point, Reece James, who when he can play is very good, but he's injured all the time. Wesley Fofana, who's very good, is also injured all the time. They spent a lot of money on Wesley Fofana. The 200 million they splashed on Caicedo and Enzo Fernandez just doesn't make sense to me. They spent another 60 million on Romeo Lavia, who hasn't been fit for the entire season. And Kunku had a unfortunate injury, is back now, and he looks okay. He's performing okay, but then again, he's in a very poor side. And then Cole Palmer's been the only real bright spot for them this season. Who I think has been really good. And he opened the score against against Wolves. They went 1-0 up, and then Wolves just sort of came roaring back. A little bit of luck on the first goal, deflection, and a little bit of luck on the second goal. I think it actually ended up being a Disassi own goal. But Wolves, who have never won away, they've never won away at Chelsea in the Prem. They hadn't won away against Chelsea in like 40 plus years or something or other. And they rock up there and they shake Chelsea to their very core. And Mateus Cunha bags a hat trick. And Wolves played brilliantly. And I didn't expect at the beginning of the season that Wolves would be in the position they are. I think they sit 10th now, actually one spot above Chelsea. But Gary O'Neill is doing a brilliant job. They've still got Huang Hee-chan to come back from the Asia Cup. And I think I read a stat the other day is that their attack last season really wasn't particularly great and they didn't score many goals. They've already, 23 games into the season, they've already surpassed their goal tally from the entirety of last season. So goals are not an issue for them this season. They're solid defensively as well. And, if they pick up a few more results, you never know. They could fight for a European spot.
And remind me, is the new manager or was it last
Gary
year?
O'Neill, who came in from Bournemouth because Bournemouth sacked him, which I thought was unfair at the time. But look, they went for Iraola, who they've got now, who's done really, really well. But Gary O'Neill proved himself to be a pretty good manager at Bournemouth last season when he took over. And he's doing a very good job at Wolves now as well, who I thought yesterday were brilliant. They were unlucky midweek in the manner that they lost in the end against Man United. I don't know if you saw the way that they lost. Wolves got battered in the first half. They should have. They were 2-0 down at half time, and to be honest, they should have been 3 or 4 down. But in the second half, they showed a lot of spirit. It went 2-1. Then United's got a third 3-1. But then late on, they got 2 goals. Wolves tied it at 3-3, and then a couple minutes after, in the 97th minute, Man United got the winner. But there was a lot of spirit shown from them, and again, a lot of spirit showed from them in this game. They go 1-0 down, but they come firing back. They go 4-1 up at one point, and had it not been for a Thiago Silva sort of late header, it would have ended 4-1 as well.
So in many ways, Wolves and Chelsea really sit in terms of...
Well, they're both mid-table.
Yeah, but in terms of emotional and performance, physical performance position, in completely opposite positions.
Yeah,
and so
Chelsea look a real mess on the pitch as well. They've had some good performances this year, Chelsea, but especially recently they've been really poor.
what do you think Chelsea fans can expect?
Nothing.
So for them, this is like a season.
I've said it for a while. For one, they've had so many injury issues this year already, which is unlucky, and you can't put that on them. But their refusal to sign any players over the age of 25 is hurting them, because they sold pretty much all their senior players. They got rid of a lot of players this summer, albeit they made quite a bit of money from it. But they have no real, apart from Thiago Silva in that squad, they have no real leadership. Reece James is the captain, but he's out all the time. Ben Chilwell's the vice-captain, but he's also out all the time. And so you've got a 39-year-old, about to be 40-year-old Thiago Silva, who's essentially acting as the captain. But apart from him, there's not many other, senior players to look for who probably have quite large voices in that dressing room. I think Raheem Sterling, is another senior player of the squad, but I don't think he doesn't strike me as that character to be particularly in that sort of leading sense. I think he leads more in terms of the way he plays on the pitch rather than the voice in the dressing room. And they have no one to like nurture alongside those really young midfielders, and you're just seeing Caicedo and Enzo Fernandez in there, and they look lost at times in games, and they did against Wolves as well, and it's just not working out. And you're thinking, and if you're Chelsea now, if you're a Chelsea fan right now, you're probably thinking, we sold Jorginho for 12 million last January. We could use him right now as leadership for those two in that midfield, because they need to learn how to play in those sorts of, under that pressure of playing for a big team. And the reality is they don't have that leadership next to them, and it's showing on the pitch. And they're really struggling. And if the potential for any, you didn't see them, you saw them spend however much money last January. They didn't spend a penny this January. And I think they're worried that they've seen Everton get deducted points. They've seen Everton possibly getting deducted points again, and Forest. And I think they're thinking, there was a report that came out the other day which says that even if they did want to sack Poch, they're scared that they can't afford it because it would put them into financial trouble and they might get points deduction. So they could find themselves in some real trouble over the next couple of years, especially if then it goes back to sort of Abramovich time. If they get point deduction, especially because of how they're playing right now, they're not going to get enough points. It's to the point where I don't think it will happen, but it could happen if they get deducted 10 points to start next season. If they're as bad as they were, if they're as bad as they have been this season and in last season as well, they could find themselves in a relegation battle.
Right. And instead, as you said, Wolves is looking in good shape.
Yeah, they're looking in great shape. And they'll be, where I thought they'd be in real trouble because of what happened in the summer with them, they're in a very healthy position. Chelsea, on the other hand, are not. And despite, being next to each other in the table, the outlook for them looks so different. Sorry about that. There's an alarm going off in the background. But yeah, Chelsea are a complete utter mess from top down, and their future does not look particularly healthy.
Hopefully they'll improve, this to the benefits of Chelsea fans. I'm pretty sure that Chelsea fans probably agree with a lot of the comments that you.
Yeah, everything
made.
that I've seen from most Chelsea fans online is that they want that ownership group to go because they don't know what they're doing. But the issue is that even if the ownership group were to go or Poch were to go, you're so financially restricted now because you don't make enough money from your stadium, because your stadium's one of the smallest out. It's smaller than all the other big six teams, so you don't make enough matchday revenue. You've spent all this money, so unless you're willing to sell the only good players that you do have to try and bring in other players in, then you're going to struggle there. And so new owners won't be able to do much. A new manager, I don't think, will be able to do much. I don't put too much blame on Poch, although I think he does deserve some blame. They haven't played particularly well in all their games, but they're poor, and they're poor on the pitch, and I think they'll be poor off the pitch in terms of their financial position going forward, because they took a gamble on all these really long contracts and spending a lot of money on these players and laying it out over a number of years. And while it looks like it could be smart, you need guidance for young players. And the other thing is that, you go and spend 105 million or whatever it was on Enzo Fernandez after 16 games at Benfica and 1 World Cup, where he looked good for a young player in a World Cup. But international football is so different from league football. You go and spend 115 million on Caicedo, who I think is a really good player, but to me, Caicedo was never good. To me, Declan Rice was, if you're going to spend 100 million on any number 6 in the world, it's Declan Rice. Caicedo was never that player to spend 100 million on. I don't think Caicedo should have been worth anything more than about 60 or 70 million, in part just because he doesn't have the athletic profile that someone like Declan Rice does.
Right. And so, shall we then, I suggest, focus on 3 other teams, West Ham,
well, we'll talk about the other teams quickly.
And
I do think we should talk about some of these games because, little stat for you real quick. this was in a 20 team league. This was the highest scoring weekend in Premier League history. The most amount of goals in Premier League history at a set of weekend fixtures.
Isn't that amazing?
Yeah. I mean, it's epitomised by the 8-goal thriller at Newcastle Luton, which we'll touch on quickly. Luton, who I actually really hope they stay up. I think they show real fight and real character, and I like the way that they play football. They play a lot more Route 1 football, which is very, very standard English football. Get the ball long to a big target man in someone like Adebayo or Colton Morris, and let runners go off of that, and that's how they play. And they do it really well to the point where they cause trouble for other teams. And look, Newcastle, who have suffered with injury issues for quite a while, but go to Newcastle and put 4 past them and be leading 4-2 at one point in the game is nothing easy to do. And well, it's exactly what Luton did. They, it was 1-0 to Newcastle. They came back 1-1. Then Newcastle go ahead 2-1, and you're thinking at that point, you're away at St James's Park. That's really tough at that point to see yourself go behind after levelling it once if you're Luton. They go and score 3, and they find themselves 4-2 up. And Newcastle do come back very well, and they come back into the game 4-4. But I didn't watch the game, but from the highlights, it looked like a real, very, very good game to watch. So
as I say, you up in, obviously Luton is
I think
enjoying a good spell, and you would opt that
another
they stay
quick
up.
look at the table again, but I think they might be.
And what about Newcastle? You know what?
Well, I'll get the table up quickly. So Luton are currently just above the drop zone. They're above Everton, having played a game less than Everton as well. So, they're in a healthy position, Luton, right now. They're picking up points, and actually, I did think there was a chance that out of all the newly promoted teams, I thought Luton had the best chance just because of the way that they play football.
And what about Newcastle?
Newcastle currently sat on 9th. They're not doing as well, I'm sure, as they would hope to. Albeit I think their chance to the Champions League football this season are gone. I don't think they'll get it. They're 11 points behind Spurs, who are in 5th. They're 13 points behind Villa, who are in 4th. As much as they battered Villa on both occasions this season, Newcastle have not been consistent enough. And look, at home to Luton, you should be beating them. And to concede 4 to them at home is bad. If you're Newcastle, albeit that they did show spirit to come back in that game, but you should never be in that position in the first place. They've conceded far too many goals. Last season they were really good defensively, really difficult to break down. This season they've leaked far too much at the back, and I think the target for them will just to get back into Europe again, whether that's Conference League or Europa League. I know they probably hope for Europa League, and look, if there's the chance that 6th and 7th is Europa League because 5th goes to a Champions League spot, then there's a chance that they could there's a real chance they could get Europa League football again. But if it goes to 5th and 6th, they might struggle to get themselves back into Europa League. Well, to get into Europa League instead.
Right. Who else? Matches wise, who else do you know?
We'll talk about Man United because they had what turned to be a quite comfortable win in the end against West Ham. Although I did watch at times the first half, and they because it was the game before Arsenal Liverpool, which we caught the first half before leaving. Rasmus Højlund has now scored, I think, in his last 4 Premier League games. Looks to have really announced himself, after a really tough start in the Prem. But I was never really that concerned about him, in the Premier League, because I thought you don't score 5 goals in the Champions League and then don't do anything in the Prem. Like, that's just quite unlikely as a player. That you then don't turn up, especially as a 21-year-old. And he looks to have found a bit of form now and put that bad form behind him in the league and scored again a really good goal with his weak foot on the outside of the box. And then Garnacho pops up in the second half and gets 2 goals and ends up making it look like, on paper, 3-0 looks quite comfortable. But I know that at least for United, if you watch the game, it wasn't that comfortable for them. The first half, they were really on the back foot at times. Although West Ham didn't create that much, United was sat really deep at times. And think the biggest takeaway from that game, they won 3-0, but Lisandro Martinez looks like he's injured himself again. So after being out for 4 months and as good as he was last year, comes back, and if the reports are right, he'll be out for another month or two, which could really damage their chances to... Well, I don't think they'll get Champions League football now with that. They had outside a chance if they finish 5th to get Champions League football again, but I think they're now stuck in a race for Europa League football.
But they are, compared to a few weeks ago, it feels they're in a better position.
Yeah, that's most definitely. They're in a much stronger position now than they were a few weeks ago.
So it's a question whether they keep on going. As you said, it is unlikely that, as it looks like now on the table, given the position, of other teams, that they it doesn't look like they can fight for a top 4. But I think things been so tight, you never know.
Yeah, I mean, you never know if Villa or Spurs fall off and that 5th spot is a Champions League spot. Then, there's a potential there. It's not that far off, but just given the...
And what do you think West Ham United?
I mean, they're right below United right now, only 2 points behind Man United. They're on 36 points in 7th place. I think Europa League football again for them would be really good, where they've been sort of for the past number of years in Europe. They've played 3 seasons in a row now in Europe. Obviously, won the Conference League last season. How far they go in Europe this season will be yet to see. But I think that's sort of... They've bounced back after last season in the league having a poor season, so they're in a healthy position, West Ham. So I'm sure they'll want to get back to winning ways, because I think the last 4 games they haven't won. In fact, the last game that they did win was against us at the Emirates. So they'll want to get back to winning ways now. But they're in a healthy position, given sort of the expectations that you probably have for them in the start of the season would have been finishing the top half, especially even with the loss of Declan Rice over the summer. They've invested really well, and it's sort of whereabouts where I think they'll be if they have when it came to their mid-season review. I'm sure they would have been looking at it like we're probably just about where we want to be right now, which is fighting for Europa League spots again.
Shall we look then now at Spurs and Villa's games and have a little chat about...
We'll speak about Villa first, who made a lot of ease of a 5-0 win against Sheffield, where I think they were 4-0 up in the first half an hour. Sheffield will finish bottom. Unfortunately, they're just not good enough. I said it from the start of the season. They were not going to be good enough. They lost too many of their key players over the summer to even give them a chance of staying up. And even with getting back their old manager in, they're struggling, to say the least.
And what about Villa?
Down at bottom. And Villa, who after maybe a bit of a blip, that loss against Newcastle where they lost 3-1, back to winning ways for them. Emphatic win for them, 5-0 away from home as well. And I know at one point people were saying, potentially Villa in a title race. I don't think that will happen, but
do you think
they're still very healthy position to get Champions League football? If they finish top 4, they'll definitely get Champions League football, and they could do that. They're in a race with Spurs, sort of 4th place. But if 5th place is a Champions League spot, they could be playing Champions League football next season, which for a club like Villa would be massive. I don't believe they played Champions League football under the new format, but they might have back in the 90s. But I could be wrong about that. But
I know the fans might be really excited because obviously they've had...
Yeah, I mean, the minimum I think they'll get Europa League football, the very bare minimum, whether that's that they win the Conference League, which they look like they're favourites to win, or they get Europa League football through the league positions instead. But, I mean, Champions League football would be the dream for those fans, I'm sure it would be. For a team that has a European Cup in their silverware. We'll move on to the team that is just sat 2 points below them, and that is Spurs, who played away at Everton. Everton's a tough place to go, especially sort of recently. They've picked up a decent amount of form, despite the 10-point deduction. Although the last 5 games they haven't been particularly great. Everton, they haven't actually won any games in their last 5. They'd be very comfortably mid-table right now without that deduction. So, Everton actually played pretty well, created a decent amount of chances. Spurs didn't, looked a bit toothless in the game, but the one thing that they've done really well this year is that even in games where they haven't been particularly great, they've still been good at scoring goals. And you maybe would have expected that to dip after Son goes to the Asia Cup because he's their one player up top that is just a brilliant finisher in front of goal. But Richarlison, who, as poor as he was last season, has really stepped up for them recently and bagged 2 goals in this game against his former club. And Spurs get a point away at Everton, although they'll feel frustrated at that, given that they were leading up until the very last second of the game, until Everton got the equaliser. But I think given how the game went, a draw was probably a good point, sort of all things considered, given the performance of Spurs. But I'm sure they'll feel frustrated about dropping points, given that they could have won. If they'd held on, they could have won the game.
What do you think Spurs fans can expect, for the end of this season, for this second half now?
I mean, I think for them it's just, getting those players back who played in AFCON and played at playing the Asia Cup and having a strong sort of finish to the season now and getting themselves, for one, definitely back into Europe and very possibly back into the Champions League, which I'm sure if you are Spurs fans at the beginning of the season, do you think you'll get Champions League football this year? All of them would have said no chance. Europe, maybe, but Champions League, no. So they're all very, very happy with where they are, I'm sure. But I will say their performances at times, they've gotten a little bit lucky with their results because, in part it helps that they have two players that I would consider what people call XG cheaters. And that essentially is that Vicario's very good at keeping goals out. So even though they face a lot of expected goals against, Vicario, being a really good goalkeeper, keeps them out. And Son, who is a brilliant, brilliant finisher up top, scores chances that he shouldn't really possibly, for your average player wouldn't score, but because he's Son, puts them in the back of the net. And so actually, if you look at their expected goals for and expected goals against, albeit I do understand that they were playing 2 full-backs at centre-back at one point in the season, but they do concede less than they should and they score more than they should. But we've seen Liverpool win the league doing that, so it can happen. And whether it can be sustained for the rest of the season will be yet to see. But they're in a very healthy position, Spurs, and Champions League football for them this season would be massive going forward, especially with sort of all the money that brings in.
Right. Who do you want to briefly then chat about? We can look at the
we'll
others
look at the rest
very
of the
briefly.
results because
we've had
Bournemouth Forest 1-1. Forest actually in need of a point there, so they get a point that they probably quite need. Bournemouth are a very healthy position, sort of mid-table again, so I'm sure Bournemouth would have been a bit disappointed not getting the win there, but they're currently sat on 27 points in 12th place. Although they haven't won in their last 4, they've only picked up 2 points in their last 4. Bournemouth, after going on a really good run in the league, but I'm sure they'll take. At the end of the day, if you're Bournemouth, you take the point, and the Forest definitely need all the points they can get right now, especially if they get a point deduction right now. Forest will probably find themselves going down if they get that point deduction, unless Nuno can turn things around for them. Because currently sat on 21 points, if they get a 10-point deduction like Everton did, unless Everton also get a 10-point deduction, they could find themselves in a lot of trouble very, very quickly.
Do you think the decision would be made for the two teams before the end of the season?
It's difficult to say.
Right.
I mean, if it happened, the Everton deduction came in so quickly. If that happens again with these two, because it's just one single charge, which it could happen quickly, they could find themselves both being deducted points. If they do, then you never know how things can go down there.
So who else we got left?
Then
Crystal
two
Palace?
more games that we haven't discussed, but Brighton 4, Crystal Palace 1. That one is a what they refer to as the motorway derby, because they're not actually anywhere near each other. Well, they're not particularly near each other. I think there's some rivalry back in the 70s or 80s, and they've kept it as sort of remained as a pretty big rivalry between them. But Brighton make it very easy doing of Palace, and Palace struggled recently, continue to struggle, and I mean, they protested at the Emirates a couple of weeks ago when we beat them 5-0, and their fans aren't happy. I mean, they've been in the Premier League now for, 10 years now, and they've never, I think their best finish is, I think, 10th. I mean, they've never, they're having to see teams come up and, I mean, they've seen Leicester come up, win the league and win an FA Cup. They're a bit of a outlier, Leicester. But, they're seeing other teams who have come up of maybe similar size to them. They've seen Brighton come up playing European football. They've seen, obviously, West Ham are a big club, but they've seen West Ham come up as well, sort of a similar time to them. And obviously, West Ham have been playing European football for a number of years now.
Must be quite frustrating for
definitely. But I mean, Burnley have been up and down, and even Burnley had a season in the Europa League. Wolves have had a season in the Europa League. So Southampton had a number of seasons in the Europa League. So teams of similar sort of size to them. And despite how long they've been in the Premier League, with all the money that comes with all the revenue, with all the TV revenue, they've never looked at challenging. They've never even challenged for a European spot. Palace.
Do you think because the ownership is quite happy just to have a middle of the table team?
They're not taking, in part, there's just no risks taken. I mean, you saw, they sacked Vieira last season. They got Hodgson in, and you're thinking, okay, just to sort of see the season out, make sure that we confirm our Premier League status. Cool. You'd expect them to sign a new manager in the summer. They didn't do that. They gave Hodgson a new contract, and those fans are just like, the club is going nowhere. We're just stuck in mediocrity. And in this season, they're not particularly doing very well, but they very well may stay up. And even if they go on an awful run from now until the end of the season, what very well may keep them up is the fact that possibly Everton and Forest get deductions, and then the two teams below them currently, Burnley and Sheffield, just won't be good enough to stay up themselves to get enough points. So Palace, could be awful this season but stay up based on two teams getting deductions.
What about Brighton?
Whereas Brighton are flying and, still really struggle to keep clean sheets. Brighton, despite, in fact, the only clean sheets they've kept recently is 0-0 draws, which is strange for them. But after getting battered last week at Luton 4-0, they bounced back well in what is a big game for them, and they made it easy against Palace, and they beat them 4-1. So Brighton looking relatively strong again to challenge for Europe again, which is, I'm sure, exactly where De Zerbi wants them, and probably where you would, if you're a Brighton fan, hope that you would be at this point in the season, which is going for Europa League football again. I mean, I'm sure, I hope some of them would think, maybe, you never know, maybe we could challenge for Champions League football, but I think that's quite unlikely, given the losses, obviously, of Caicedo and McAllister in the summer. So to be challenging for Europa League again is where they want to be. So,
and I think reality is that they're already sort of about 10 points out of the top four. And
yeah, I mean, they're 11 points behind Villa, so that's very unlikely. And then even if fifth spot opens up, Spurs are currently 9 points above them. So there's unless they were to go on a run, there's no chance that I think they get themselves into that potential for Champions League spots. But Europa League, they're right there. On 35 points, are only a point behind West Ham, and they're 3 points behind United. So
Right, last game.
And then finally, the last game of the weekend was Fulham, who drew 2-2 with away at Burnley. Fulham go 2-0 up in the first half. Was it 2-0? Yeah, 2-0 in the first half, I believe. And looking like they'll probably cruise to another win. But Burnley do fight back, show some spirit, and their new signing up top, Fofana, gets 2 goals. I think one of them relatively later on in the game. Yeah, 91st minute. And they fight back and get a point, which for Burnley right now is crucial given their position in the table in 19th. And look, if those deductions do come to Everton and Forest, it opens up a chance for Burnley to stay up potentially. So I don't think they will. Even if those deductions do come in, I do think that Everton will probably stay up themselves. But that's the one thing they'd be hoping for right now. But points is what they need right now. And 1 point for them is, well, it's 1 out of 13 of their points they've won this season. So every point for them is crucial right now. Fulham, I'm sure, would have been kicking themselves having been 2-0 up. But again, I think Fulham find themselves in a similar situation last season where they'll finish relatively comfortable in the mid-table. They're 13th currently. They don't look like they'll be in any trouble of possibly getting relegated unless something awful were to happen.
Yeah, so do you think they're just going to end up sort of, again, mid-table?
They'll finish mid-table again, I reckon, Fulham. So, yeah. Now, one thing before we do go, because we are going to try and do this. Actually, I know I've said this every time, but we're going to try and do this, which is actually predict next game week's fixtures and hopefully actually then look at them for when we record next. So next weekend, the early kickoff on the Saturday is City at home to Everton.
And I'm going to say something unrealistic because I'm really hoping that City drops points and Everton is a good team. I can see this being 2-2. I know it's unlikely.
2-2. Wow. Okay. Whereas I think that City will win. Although I do think that Everton will make it difficult for them. And by difficult, City will win 2-0. But I don't think they'll roll past Everton. I think Everton will be strong defensively. Okay. Then 3 p.m. kickoffs next weekend. The first one is Fulham at home to Bournemouth. Tell me what you think.
I think Fulham is going to win.
Okay.
This is going to be 2-0.
2-0 to Fulham. I think this is going to be a draw. I'm going to go 1-1. Relatively boring. Next up, Liverpool at home to Burnley.
I know that this is...
You go for another upset?
No, it's going to be a 3-0.
3-0 Liverpool. I will go for a 4-1 to Liverpool. Big clash down at the bottom. Luton at home to Sheffield.
Oh, Luton is going to win. They'll be all happy for how they played last time. This is going to be
they scored 8 goals in their last 2 games, Luton.
This is going to be a 2-0.
Okay, 2-0 to Luton. I'm actually going to agree with you on that. I'm going to go 2-0 as well. Actually, no, I'm going to change my mind. 1-0. After that, Spurs at home to Brighton. Oh, that's a good game, actually.
Yeah, it's a good game. This is not going to be
easy. 3 p.m. It's not on TV, although I think we all know what happens with 3 p.m. games. How we watch them.
I don't know. I think Brighton has a chance.
I mean, they should have won their last season, Brighton, but they got robbed.
And they'll remember. It's going to be a 1-1.
1-1. Okay. Brighton don't know how to keep clean sheets. Spurs also struggle keeping clean sheets. It's going to be a high-scoring game. I'm going to go 3-2 Spurs. Next up, Wolves at home to Brentford.
Well, a difficult game. And again, I think we're going to see a lot of goals here as well.
Really? Okay.
I think so. Yeah. This is going to be a 2-2.
2-2. Okay. 4 goals. I will go for a 2-1 Brentford. No, Wolves win. Yeah, no, 2-1 Wolves win. Not actually currently predicted any away wins, to be fair. Actually, I'm going to change my mind. I think Brentford will win 2-1. Forest at home to Newcastle. Forest desperately in need of points.
I know, but Newcastle, I think...
I will say Newcastle haven't been very good away from home this season.
I can see this Newcastle win 2-0.
Okay, 2-0 win to Newcastle. I'm going to go for an upset here. I'm going to go for 1-0 Forest. On the 5:30 kickoff on the Saturday. 2 games on the Sunday. First one, West Ham. We have got West Ham. West Ham against Arsenal. Now, West Ham have given us problems this season.
They have, and I think Arsenal would remember, and hopefully they learned the lesson. This is going to be a 2-1 to Arsenal.
Okay. I think Arsenal will go into this game with a lot of fire behind them, and I actually don't think they'll concede. I'll go for a 3-0 Arsenal win, which sounds very confident, but that's what I'm going for. Villa against United. This is a big game, actually.
This is a big game and difficult to predict, really.
Yeah, Villa, I mean, last time at Old Trafford, Villa went 2-0 up and United had a miraculous comeback in the second half and they won 3-2. This time around, though, Villa at home, where they lost their first time in a year against Newcastle the other day, but Villa very good at home in the league.
I know. I think 2-1 to Villa.
2-1 to Villa. I'm going to go 3-1 Villa. And then on the Monday, there's an 8 p.m. game. That is Palace at home to Chelsea.
Oh, my God.
2 teams that are struggling right now.
I don't know. And 1-1.
1-1. I'm going to go for a 0-0. As boring as that is.
Right. So next time we're going to double check how we're done.
Yeah, unless we decide to go for 2 months again without recording an episode, we will actually get to this next time, and I'll make sure that we actually do record an episode next week and do start doing more sort of weekly episodes. But otherwise, if you are still with us, thank you for listening to the return to the podcast, the return to teaching my dad football. Have you learned anything this episode?
I don't know. I think I kind of starting to remember a little bit more things, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, I feel like I didn't really need to explain XG as much this time to you. So we're on the right track.